Welcome back to the TrailBLAZER pod. In this episode, Emily reflects on her experiences with childhood loss, the influence of her Jewish upbringing, and her journey with an eating disorder. She talks about the significance of self-expression, activism, and raising awareness of sexual assault on college campuses. The conversation highlights the healing power of storytelling and the strength of using life experiences to create change. Let's dive in. So great to have you and officially meet you.
I know, it's been like all the digital connections over this.
So let's get right into it. We're going to start with something that I usually, warm up into this, but let's start from your childhood.
Yeah.
I want to talk about, I know your dad passed at 7.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to ask you, how did this change your life? I know it obviously did, but I think when you're so young, you don't always realize how it affects you.
Totally.
And so I'm curious how, now looking back in hindsight, how that shifted everything for you.
I definitely feel like it was a pretty defining moment. Obviously, I think anyone who's lost someone in their life would say, there's this moment before they've passed and there's a moment after they've passed. And one of the things I always come to with this is grief is designed to really change you. So for me, it really created a shift in the fabric of my family dynamic and brought on a lot of independence, at a young age. My mom was obviously still there and taking care of my sister and I, but you have to imagine it's now you're going, there's a pretty drastic change. And so what it did for me was instilled a tremendous amount of independence, self-authority. And I also think it was really part of what kind of created this drive inside of me. I don't really know how else to describe it except this insatiable desire to make life worth living kind of thing. Do things that are interesting, not wait, because you kind of never know. And my dad was a very loved life, was very much lived in a very big way. And it's a constant reminder.
Thank God my parents are still here.
Yeah.
My grandma died at 49, my grandpa at 59. And so I just constantly saw loss as a kid. And what it did to me, and I'm curious if it did this to you, I saw life always ending. And I was okay, if I don't live past 30, very existential crisis mode since a little girl. And it's only now, I'm 28 now, it's only the past 2 years where I'm actually oh wow, I can't wait till I'm 80, 90. I'm starting to see numbers beyond 40, 50. And so I'm curious, did you have that, or did you have the opposite, where you almost wanted to kind of prove that wrong? Because it can go both ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of just depends on where, at different stages of life, I think, and even just in the moment, right? Because I think for me, it first started off with okay, I don't know when my time is going to come. Mm-hmm. So I feel I've gotta hustle, gotta create enough life for myself within, whatever time frame I had. And so I think probably up until right before my age 30, I was really living from that reality. And I think now it's maybe shifted a little bit, which is, okay, I actually have a new sense of what it means to be myself. And so kind of was able to define that in a different way. So kind of going to that later stage of, trying to prove that wrong, of just no, I don't have to cram in all this life into this little teeny bucket. But grief is a really powerful tool. I'm really grateful for it. I think it unlocked so much for me. It unlocked a lot of maturity, I think, and desire within me to do something useful for myself and also just for others around me. So the short answer is it went both ways.
But I think that makes so much sense, because I think when you're 7 or you're a kid, you're not even thinking about it. Your survival instinct kicks in and it's
Totally.
Fight or flight, and you're just, that's just what happens to your brain. And then as you discover yourself and also you see more of life, I think it's a natural process, hopefully, if you're someone that does self-reflection and healing and,
Totally.
really looks into,
And the interesting part I always say is when you're between ages 0 and 7, there's a whole bunch of psychological research that shows that basically you're a sponge and you just absorb everything around you. And so I always like to say I was fully programmed up until he passed. And then after he left, it was now it's piecing together where that came from, where parts of myself came from. And so it's been a really interesting journey, but I've done a lot of work around grieving because it comes in waves, and I think it comes in chunks. And as I've connected more with, I'm sure we'll talk about it, but in my own world where I work with people who are facing, their own chronic illnesses or death sentences or whatever it is, it comes up, continually comes up. So it's never done. It's never
I know. We will talk about this, of course, in detail, but it's very interesting how you think certain things that happen to you in your life are just that's where it is, and then
Yeah.
full circle, years later, it comes out in such a different way that you would never expect. I'm excited to get into that. This podcast is all about Jewish women, so I just want to like a little bit of context. How did Judaism play a role in your life growing up? I read an article, of course, like every time I have a guest, I fully stalk them, just FYI.
I love it.
And you mentioned that Yom Kippur had a very, like special place in your heart. It was your favorite Jewish holiday. So maybe you can share a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so for me growing up, and this is very connected to the first question because
Oh,
the
okay.
connection to Judaism really came through my dad. Like I'm Jewish, but my dad's side of the family has always been very connected to the faith. And so
Mhm.
it was kind of through that part of my life and that part of my family dynamics that we went to temple. We like went on a regular basis, went to high holy days, the whole thing. Like, it was very much a part of who we were culturally, again, at that young age. And as we got older, as my dad passed away, I think I'm actually quite grateful for this because it kind of, my mom allowed us to kind of have a little bit more curiosity about what does faith and what does religion and what does culture mean. And so we're able to look at it from a different context. But on my dad's side of the family, I have like a very wide range of, or my whole family have a very wide range of like religious experiences. So my stepdad, my mom got remarried, like one of his brothers is like married to a born again Christian, and I have a
Oh, yeah.
cousin who is a Orthodox rabbi in Jerusalem. So I feel like
Oh,
I
yeah.
have this very wide range.
I love
And
that.
for me, spirituality, I've always felt is so alive in the way my family maintains the Jewish faith. So in my dad's side of the family, they're very, very spiritual. And I would consider myself more spiritual than, structured in any sort of religious capacity. But the thing, and with that framing, what I have loved about the Jewish holidays in particular, that's still true, but really the connection to Yom Kippur, but in particular, the connection, that time period between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, to me, I've always found to be a very sacred time of rebirth and intention setting, like less structured context. You can really recreate yourself. And about maybe 2 years ago, I started to get into the Kabbalah and like starting reading and different courses and stuff. I think it's like
Yeah.
has a bit of a trend to it nowadays.
Yeah, definitely.
But a girlfriend of mine was like, come to some courses with me. So I did.
That's
And
awesome.
I really took that period seriously. And I truly felt like I came out of that portal like a new person. Like, I had a different way of looking at things. And so I think like the way that the Jewish calendar is structured and how we look at our relationship to, the world, I think there's something really unique about it because it's also aligned like from solstices. It's very cool. So you can really take advantage of that time period to create a new stage for yourself.
I love hearing about this because I kind of had a little bit of the opposite experience where your mom allowed you to explore and it was almost like everything was beautiful because it was in your own way. For me, it was, I had to find my own journey and it took a long time for me to figure out that religion is separate from culture and spirituality, right? Because it was very intertwined in the way I was raised. So it's only again now, like later in life, where I'm experiencing kind of what you're saying. So I just love hearing people's experiences. So thank you for sharing that. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
And what I've also found too is because I think that foundation of that curiosity allowed me to go very wide and deep and like have
Yeah.
have a lot of appreciation for friends of mine who are like very into the Bible and people who are very into like other things, other forms of connection to source and or whatever you call divine source or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And one of the things I found really fun is like my aunt is, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget the name of it, but she basically makes sure that every word is getting pronounced correctly from the Torah. Like,
Oh,
what I'm talking about?
yes, yes, yes.
Anyway, so but so she's so connected to the religion, to what's in
Yeah.
the text and all that. And I'll like, go off and find this really far off like or far out like spiritual principles, and then I'll ask her opinion. And what's really
Oh,
interesting is like everything that you can find out there, I think when you dig deep enough or you go deep enough into what all the material is, it all relates. And so there's lots of things
yeah.
that are out there that she's like, oh yeah, it says the exact same thing in the Torah right here. I'm like, wow. So it's
That's amazing.
to me it's a whole ecosystem.
Yeah, no, I'm glad I asked this question because I obviously wanted to tie it back to Judaism, but it
Yeah.
actually it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Pivoting a little bit.
Let's go. Let's go.
Okay, one thing that I find very inspiring, well, there's a few things that I found very inspiring about you, but one of it is that you're very like open, transparent, vulnerable, about a lot of stuff that most of us just don't talk about.
Yeah.
And one of the things is about your eating disorder, and I know it affected your journey a lot with music and all that. But I want to ask you about that journey, whatever you're willing to share, and the journey of uncovering it.
Yeah, uncovering the disorder itself, or like coming into self, like which version do you
So
want me to go down?
I also struggled a little bit with an eating disorder
Yeah.
when I was 15, 16.
Mhm.
And there was the part where we had to figure out that it was an eating disorder.
Mm.
Then there's the part of me being now 28 and kind of why did I have an eating disorder,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
It's again like the survival, and then it's being able to reflect on it now that I'm in a really good place. So
Yeah.
kind of both.
Okay, perfect. So I could talk about this all day. And actually,
Amazing.
in the book that I'm releasing soon,
Yeah.
I talk very deeply about this, and it really is the thread from everything we've just spoken about to where I am today. And so, lost my dad, we've already talked about that. And for me, it wasn't just about the loss of my father, but also the loss of control and the loss of, I think, innocence in a way. I also had an experience with sexual abuse when I was a kid, not familial actually. It was one of those rare instances with like a
Yeah.
stranger. So, in a weird
That,
way, kind of lucky, but also not. Like that's like a weird
yeah.
thing to talk about. But so what I realized is that for me, the disorder was really about my own experience of trying to understand abuse and my own worthiness within that abuse, or my own fault within that abuse. And so what I've realized in my own journey, along with, how I show up in the world, like approach things, like my desire to have drive and accomplish things. A lot of this stuff was all connected to this real distortion, really, of my own self-love, which expressed itself through an eating disorder. But for me, the eating disorder was just an expression. The abuse and the loss, and like the early loss and the abuse that I went through was really the root of it. And my eating disorder was me trying to sort all that stuff out. And what I've come to realize is so much of disease, as it's understood, is actually like the expression of some of these things that have happened to us earlier. So when I was 14-ish, that's when I just was presenting in a way where I really just wasn't eating. And I saw it as a way to gain back control of like a changing body, a changing, moving from middle school to high school. You're going through this kind of pivotal time. And historically, like psychologically, this is a time when a lot of people go through, like you were talking about, like they go through this
Yeah.
pivot and it feels a sense of complete out of controlness, right?
Yeah.
In control of our body, not in control of our decisions, our lives, our school, all sorts of
Exactly.
things. And it can express itself. So what was also really interesting as a pairing between these things is up until that point, I was committed to singing, music, creating, writing. Like this was a part of me. Like it was, even as a kid, like all I wanted was to sing. And like my mom asked my mom for singing lessons, and I was like in commercials as a kid. Like weird stuff. It
Wow.
was
Okay.
just, yes, very strange. It's all
Love
happened very
it.
symbolically, right? Like, and it's like timed really fascinating. So I had this like
Mm.
love of performance and expression. And again, during that time period where, we're going through changes, my mom had just gotten remarried, we moved. So I was completely out of control. I ended up stopping singing. And within 6 months, I got sick with the disorder, with this kind of way of expressing. So to me, it's about this abuse, the early loss being kind of the root cause analysis, me turning off the faucet of my own self expression being, the reason why the symptoms really came online. And me today has been a reclamation of that whole story and deciding, no, I do actually have this love still. I am still myself. And, healing the roots of all of that loss and all of the loss of my own body autonomy, like all of that has been a very liberating process. And everything else in between has just been along for the ride. So,
Smiling a lot, not because of what you went through, but I'm smiling because I can relate so much. And I had the same thing. My eating disorder was never about how do I look. It's all about the control, right? Like again, a lot of loss, a lot of sickness. And life was just, as a young kid, life was just crazy. And the only way I knew how was to turn it inward and have that sense of control. So I can
totally.
so relate. Yeah, and this is why I love when people share things like that. It's because it makes you reflect about your own journey and
Yeah.
connect the dots, which
And
wouldn't
also,
always happen.
and even what you were saying too about just your upbringing and how like you're reclaiming this religious world, or like,
Yeah.
you can call it cultural or whatever, but like you're reclaiming it through your own
Yeah.
expression, when it was a control mechanism. So it's like
It's
anything can be utilized as a control mechanism with intent, right? So,
yeah.
or with maybe a distortion of truth. Like that's the thing
Absolutely.
I've really gotten clear on, is like these things that are harmless in so many ways, if you just move them 1 degree to this place of maybe not 100% always in our
Yeah.
highest good, it can create a lot of havoc, which I think gets to be our own hero's journey, of
Yeah.
course, and can give us a platform to explore ourselves and these things from a different lens. So
Absolutely.
I totally get what you're saying. It makes, yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious though, like what made you decide to be open about topics like eating disorders, sexual abuse? Again, not topics that are often talked about. So what kind of gave you the courage?
What an interesting question. So I guess I first really started talking about this stuff when when I went to college, when I got to college, and I realized how bad the resources were for people on campus who were abused and who had sexual trauma. And it was at that time my voice really opened on behalf of, I feel like in my bones, I have a bit of like a activist spirit,
Yeah.
you call
Yeah.
that. I don't know if like something's
Yeah.
wrong, and I'm just like, I gotta do something about this. It's kind
It's
of,
a good quality,
it's a
I
bit of
think.
it's been a road
Yeah.
of learning, like how do you still have maintain yourself while
Yeah.
still, fighting for the
Definitely.
cause kind of
Yeah.
thing, in my own
Yeah.
way. So for me, it was just kind of like lighting a match, it was a bit about just me being me, and feeling a drive towards something that I didn't even really understand that much about. And what's
Hmm.
interesting about this story, I feel a bit compelled to share this piece, is at that time, I still didn't have the full memories of what I had gone through with my abuse when I was a kid. This is very common, by the way. Memory suppression is a way that we protect ourselves. It's a way that our mind keeps us safe. It's like all very, there's lots of tremendous amount of like psychological research papers and neuroscience studies about this. So
Which, by the way, I love reading about. So I'm
me
gonna.
too. We're in this together. Yeah. I,
Yes.
I have a good article on this that I can send to you and we can
Yes,
share,
please.
but I think it was either Northwestern University. Anyway, one of those basically talked about how the mind does this, how we hold on to these memories
Yeah.
and we keep them in these little places in our brains until we're ready to heal them. So
Right.
I didn't even really know that the reason I was
Wow.
so drawn to speaking out on these sorts of topics was because of my own story. And as I basically moved through my own need to express myself, I just realized that the more I spoke up about what I went through, the more I could have these sorts of dialogues, right? Where me just sharing what I've learned about it is opening up revelations
Yeah.
for even just small little ones, right? That maybe you already had, but it's helping others make those connections through their own parallel experiences. And what I've landed on is that even though I've had a million jobs and worn a million hats, at my
We're gonna talk about that.
we're gonna talk about that. At my core, I'm a communicator. I'm just, that is what I'm here to do, is to communicate, to express, and to help through my own storytelling. And so to me, artistry looks like a lot of different things, and my paintbrush has gone to many different businesses and many different roles. But that's always what I'm about, is like how do I express myself for my own
Yeah.
self-preservation, right? Like,
Yeah.
so I don't get
That's
sick
amazing.
again. Like I got to do it.
Absolutely. I also find it very fascinating. It's exactly what you're saying. Sometimes it's easier for us to face something when it's somebody else's life because you get to have, again, the control that it's not you. You don't have to turn fully inward, but you still get to exercise certain things. I've had this also in my life where I'm doing things without even realizing that I went through the same thing. And it's just I'm drawn to it as well. And I think it's like actually really healthy way of kind of starting the process
Mm.
of facing it fully. I was going to ask you this later, but perfect segue. You started an organization on campus,
Mhm.
right? What was that and how did it come about?
Yeah, so this was way back, so I'll kind of take you back in time. There was
Okay,
something
amazing.
called the Dear Colleague letter that was released, and God, it must have been maybe 2009, 2010. And it was basically a letter to universities and campuses basically saying, sexual assault is a problem on campus and
Yeah.
you need to do something about it. So there was this like moniker that was released from the tippy top, right?
Yeah.
Encouraging campuses to look at this in a unique way. Right before that letter got released, I was a freshman in college. So this was new. People were not
Wow.
really talking. This was not cool. It was not in
Yeah.
vogue. No celebrities were talking about this stuff. It was like
Yeah.
the band geeks in the corner who were trying to make some
Wow.
change kind of thing. All love to my fellow musical geeks here, but
Yeah.
the point being, it was not like this was not an in vogue thing to talk about, and it
Yeah.
certainly wasn't really in the news. Through, the divine way that things occur, I enrolled myself into a women's studies course, not because I wanted to, because the class I was initially going to take on food culture was full, and this was the
Of
only other
course.
elective, and it was about health and well-being, like having a
Yeah.
healthy body. And I was like, okay, great, sure, I can work on my nutrition, which is what I thought was going to be happening. Instead, it was a
And
women's
then,
studies course, which again, that context was new to me. I was a college freshman, first semester, and they offered up the opportunity to have an internship as part of this role with a street harassment organization. I was not interested in street harassment at the time. I was not interested in women's health. I was really mostly interested in my own fitness and getting an internship on my resume. So this was all selfishly motivated. Then I joined the organization because I wanted that little tick on my resume, and learned about the problem and was basically like, we got to do something about this. And at the time, the college that I was at, GW is where I went to school, was basically just waiting for an excited student to really take on all of the components of policy and all of the like change on campus. And so I basically decided to do it. And it was a really, really interesting 4 years. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to like my daughter, if I were to like have a daughter or a son, because I think when you are trying to make change around, sexual misconduct, it doesn't always make you the most fun person at the party. And like I always like to say, like I was working pretty closely with the head of police at that time to, change policies and inform the police officers on how to like have good response to the survivors when they, going to a call. So this was like very intimate. So if I got caught with like a red solo cup in my hand, it could mean implications. So it was an interesting time, but when I left, the organization's still around now. It's called GW Students
oh,
Against
wow.
Sexual Assault. And every now and again, I like creep on how they're doing, and they're doing super well. When I left, the in order to be considered a candidate, a reasonable candidate for like the president of the school, you would have had to have a SASA endorsement, or else they wouldn't even consider you. So, and at GW, very political school in Washington, D.C., that's like a big deal. And so they don't know who the heck I am. Like the people who run it today don't know my name, and that's totally fine by me. But it's still alive,
Yeah.
and like
Well, you
it's
left your
thriving.
mark, really,
Totally.
right? Yeah.
Totally.
That's amazing. Also, I work for the police department on campus, and and I wanted to do criminal profiling for the FBI. And so
Wow.
I lived under this like I cannot do anything, no one can see me, I can't post anything, which so much stress for a 20-year-old.
Mm.
It took a while to like get rid of all those restrictions that I put on myself.
I love it. What a niche little thing, right? It really does
Yeah.
color your experience for sure.
For sure. I really gotta do like a do-over of college because I did not experience that life.
Wait, let's do it.
Let's do it. I want to ask you about the role tech played in this
Oh, yeah.
because foreshadows to your career in tech. We'll talk about that after. But I feel like that was pretty early on for tech campaigns and
Mhm.
tech playing a role in.
You know what's so interesting? Technology was a big part of that. Like, so what was happening at that time is, again, remember early like
Yeah.
2000s Facebook was just starting to be a thing. And so what I started to realize is that on Facebook, you could actually message things in mass, right? You could create group pages, you could post, you could have like people talking about you. Like it was like the OG influencer
Yeah.
campaigns, right?
Yeah.
So what we did is basically take statistics about like to raise awareness. Cause I was like, this is a crazy problem. Everybody needs to know this, right? In my little, I gotta change this.
Advocacy. Yeah.
How do I do this? And so we did a mix of guerrilla marketing. So we postered the entire campus with like, statistics about sexual violence and how it's pervasive, just to change the perception
Yeah.
of it. And then utilized Facebook, like some anonymous submission tools that no longer exist, where people could
Wow.
basically put in their experience with sexual violence on campus, and then it could be,
That's amazing.
publicized. People could go and watch because it was a
Right.
silent problem. No one talked about it, and if you came forward, most people didn't. So we basically put together, like utilizing all this like early 2000s internet technology, a campaign. And it ended up getting a good amount of traction. Like we got coverage in the Washington Post, Washingtonian,
Wow.
Cosmopolitan did a feature on us. Like this was like a new
That's
thing.
cool.
It got some attention because of what we were doing, but nowhere near the attention that, 5 years later, people
Yeah.
got when this was a really hot topic, which is all good. That's totally fine.
Yeah, but again, I think it's so much more powerful when somebody does something like this and speaks up when it's not the norm to do it, right? It's much scarier than when it's cool, like you said, when Vogue is talking about this stuff. Sure, it's always going to be brave to talk about your like vulnerable experiences, but how much scarier when nobody is, you know?
Yeah.
So kudos to
Yeah.
you. I think that's amazing.
And what's interesting too is there's in this early time period there was a girl that I met and had some early interactions with. Her name was Amanda Wynn, and she now went on to be like an astronaut and like speak out on Congress. It just was like really interesting time horizons. Like we were building things that were very parallel, and I was like, wow, like what an interesting time period to be working on these things. It just
That's incredible.
yeah. Sometimes I look back and I'm like, did that happen? Like.
It's like incredible. But I'm also like wondering, did this inspire you to go into the tech space or was it a completely separate?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was really looking for a way to translate my skills. And part of it is that I have a family friend who worked pretty high up at the World Bank, and I thought, oh, I want to help people. So let me go into a more of the World Banky world. And he
Yeah.
came to me and was like, we had like a chat, like as people do when they have folks that are
Yeah.
willing to mentor them or give them advice, in their career, early career. And I told him about what I was up to and what I was interested in, and he kind of said to me, you know what? I don't think you're really gonna like the World Bank. I think it might stifle. And he's like, and you'd have to go to like more schooling and this and this. And he kind of laid
Hmm.
it out. And he's like, why don't you explore technology? And then introduced me to his son,
That's
who I'd
so
never
cool.
met. Yeah, who
Wow.
was working at an technology agency, and they ended up hiring me to do first just like business development for them, but really soon after, companies started realizing that they wanted to do social media marketing and they
Hmm.
wanted to have social media campaigns. So I basically, me and my former boss at the time, who still is a good friend and mentor of mine, basically decided to build out a division of what I basically
Wow.
did for the SASA campaigns and all the stuff I did around sexual violence and apply it to companies. And so that was my
That's wild. It's wild how like those something you do in college just translates into, but also what a cool mentor.
it
On
was
this
awesome.
podcast, the common theme is a lot of mentorship is so crucial, especially
Oh
for
my God.
women.
She's like literally I'm in the process of trying to figure out like what do I want to do with my life now? And I call her, like these early mentors, and she's still like just an incredible like powerhouse woman. Mentorship is
Yeah.
so important.
I love what you just said. What do I want to do with my life now? Because you've done so much, but I can also so relate to this. It's like, what's next? What's next? Always what's next?
Yeah.
Who am I now? How is it going to? Do you ever stop?
Yeah, I try. I mean,
Okay.
it's a really honest question. I think I was in corporate world for a while. I left for a period of time. That's a part of the history. So all this marketing and
Yeah.
tech and social media and product work led me to work at Amazon, and I was there for quite a while. It was a healthcare initiative during COVID, so that was madness. And I was
Wow.
like, I need a break. So I took a couple of months off, and then that was really incredible. I do think that it's important for me to pause more than I do,
Hmm.
but I would say if we even go back to the initial place we started in the conversation of the loss with my dad and what was driving all of this craziness, like I'm
Yeah.
coming into a bit more, I hope, wisdom now around pace in which I move and
Hmm.
how my desire now is to just do the stuff I want to do, not do the
Yeah.
stuff that is going to be good for everyone else, but not good for me. So I think I'm going through this sort of transformation, and what's required of me now is the rest. So
Yeah.
I haven't really been good at it. And sometimes I've been kind of hard forking the experience. But this has been my biggest lesson over the past couple of years. Yeah.
That's amazing. I'm very much working on that now. Everything I do, I want it to be with purpose. Oh, I'm terrified of boredom. Like my mom says, you came out of the womb crying that you're bored. My whole life. So I'm really working through that as well. It's interesting that we're talking now because you're in this like transition healing phase.
Hmm.
Something you said in another article or interview or something was that the corporate world literally left you sick, right? Like the sickest you've been, you said since you were 14. What were like the physical symptoms? What stood out to you about it?
That last conversation, I've gone through another whole cycle. So I'm excited to share kind of where I'm at now
Okay.
with this. But the physical symptoms that I was going through, I was getting like really gnarly headaches. Like I would wake up and I would just
Mhm.
not be able to focus. My digestion was total shit. It was just terrible. And I was just tired. Like it was this chronic exhaustion. I think a lot of people face this. I certainly know I'm not alone in all of that. So much of it was what you even spoke to, like this kind of this thing within me, which I think really has been so connected to those early experiences that I've just been slowly moving through and processing. And that kind of got me to a place. Those symptoms got me to a place where I was like, okay, something really needs to change here. And there was like a moment of like, I would call it like divine intervention, where there was an email that went out that shouldn't have gone out. And then my life kind of turned upside down on its head. And I was like, how did that happen? And it was like it was on my dad's death anniversary. It was like a very unique, weird thing where I was like, whoa, like this is very strange. Let me take a pause and notice. Maybe it's time for me to actually shift. So I took that break, then ended up starting a company with two other co-founders of mine that's in the healing space, which you were alluding to. It's called Liberate, and it works to help people transmute trauma into well-being, right? So go back to the root cause of what they've experienced. Like we were talking about earlier, the eating disorder really originated with the death and the sexual abuse. And not only that, but my illness, the illness I had in the corporate world, really also started with those earlier pieces too, because it was that same program I was running that was making me push, and be attracted to jobs that weren't going to totally respect me, because I didn't totally respect me or my time. And so then I took that break, was like, okay, I'm going to started a new company. And what I realized is that I still had me. Like there were still patterns that I was not fully sorted through. And so even if I created the rules, even if I hired the team, even if I was the person making the decisions, I was still me and my shit was still my shit. And so
wow.
I ended up getting sick again about midway through the creation of the business. And what I realized in my own doubling down on illness was that the healing of any disease, any challenge actually starts with those root cause experiences and also the ancestral components that are related to them. If you want to know my TLDR about how you actually heal disease, you got to look at your ancestors. You want to know why you got the disease? Do some history. Do some history work. Look at where you came from. Look at why. Look at what you're holding subconsciously or unconsciously. And that's oftentimes the template for why people get sick. And that's what was running for me. I was running a template. My dad passed away. He passed away from a heart attack. That's a stress related thing, right? Like this is not a mystery.
Absolutely.
It's not a mystery. So I look at all those pieces and it's kind of where you go, there you are. And within this whole piece, and in the healing world and helping people understand their own traumas and heal that stuff that they've gone through, what I realize is that like if I'm not taking care of myself, if I am not prioritizing my wants and my needs, then it doesn't matter how perfectly I build the structures around me. I could still get sick. I could still be unhappy.
Okay, I'm glad I asked that because I didn't realize there was like a second phase to this. Reading a book now by Gabor Mate. It's called The Myth of Normal. Have you read it?
I love Gabor. I love that book. Yeah,
I'm literally in the middle of reading it. He says a lot of the stuff you're saying, which is really cool.
Yeah, all of that to say where I'm at now. So I wrote this book about my whole experience and my whole story. And within that book is all of the music. Like I wrote music to go along with the whole process. So it's like a combination. And to me, it feels like a homecoming, and I think, obviously the story that we started off with of just where I'm coming from and, what did I do to avoid myself, my expression, what I want, the joy I get from writing or creating or expressing something. Like, man, I built a fortress around me of everybody else's expectations, of jobs that weren't serving me, but that looked pretty, like I did all these things serving others that actually didn't serve me. And so I think, when you like recreate a whole world for yourself and you're like, I'm going to do it different, and you end up creating the same thing, you have to look in the mirror and be like, holy Moses, what am I missing? And so the most exciting thing for me is in the creation of the story and sharing what I've learned and using my voice and having conversations like these. Like,
what made you choose a book?
Never had a dream of writing.
Okay.
Oh my God. So I'm gonna hopefully tie in some of the spirituality pieces and the healing into all this. So this whole journey of healing that I went on was about, and I left my corporate job. I was like, I need to fix my physical health, which took me right back to my root experiences of the abuse and the death and the eating disorders and all that. One of the things that was told to me at a young age is that when you have an eating disorder or your mind operates that way, it's just how you're going to be. You might not be starving yourself, but you're going to have the obsessive thoughts, or you're going to have this sort of like looping experience. And many people told me that. And I was just like, I don't want to live my life that way. Sorry, that's not how I choose to live. So like, we're going to have to sort this out. So many, many, many years later, almost 3 years ago now, I was working with one of my teachers I worked with for many years on like the healing journey, the root cause stuff. And I got to a place where that energy that I was holding on to, that story around the abuse, just dissipated. Like it left, like I cleared the thing.
Wow.
And after it left, it was like all this space opened up inside of me. It was like this beautiful experiences. It was
Wow.
like of ecstasy. You don't stay in ecstasy, but from that
Yeah,
point forward, I never had an obsessive thought about food ever again.
that's amazing.
It's gone. You know how crazy that is? Even though I like
Yeah.
stopped starving myself decades ago.
Yeah.
So in that open elation, I got this download. There's no other way to describe it. It was like this voice that came in that
Wow.
just said, "You're going to write a book about what you just went through." And I was like, "A book? A book? I'm sorry. Like, what do you mean a book? Like, I'm not an author. Like, I like music. I'm a singer. I'm not an
Yeah.
author. What are you talking about?" And then it just started coming to me. So I would like wake up in the middle of the night. I'd be driving and it would be literally, it was like I would just like hear pages of things. And so I would
That's
like,
so cool.
it was wild. And I wrote the book in record time. It took me like 6 months, I think, to get
Oh
a
my
400,
God.
roughly 400-page book done. Very complete. And like, it went through editing and all that stuff, but
Wow.
it's like a manual. And so I was like
Mm.
offered the chance to write it and I chose it. And what I realized about the content of that book is it's very layered, right? You're talking about deep stuff. And sometimes when you talk about those things, it can stir for
Yeah,
people, it can start to disorient you.
definitely.
And so the music actually helps, which was my first love, right? Like actually helps you process that. So it's all meant to go
See.
together. It was a pretty arduous experience writing this thing,
Wow.
it kind of takes over your
That's
life.
so cool. I also find it amazing because different avenues of art form offer different things, right? And you're really kind of like the 360 of it.
And in the written book, there is visual art that goes along with each of the stages that I walk people through. So there's like, and that is how it came to me was the material is meant to be really surround sound,
Hmm.
like I want people to understand it, understand it. Because what does art really do? It's communicating a truth. And so each person's going to receive something different from each of the ways that it's
Absolutely.
getting communicated. So, and that's been
That's
fun
so
for
cool.
me to like
That's
test it with people and see what they get from it.
Is it out yet?
So I've been doing pre-reads with folks
Okay.
with like clients of mine and
Hmm.
friends. And one of the things I've been telling them, and to anyone who listens to this or potentially reads the book, you can always reach out to me, DM me, let me know
Oh,
where do you stop
that's amazing.
when you read it, because it takes you through a journey and where you stop and how you interact with it. And I knew when I wrote it that it was going to be transformative for people because of how
Right.
transformative it was for me. And it's not my story. It
Hmm.
is my story, but it's the process of it.
Yeah, okay. So funny fact here. I didn't even look at the questions because everything I wanted to ask came up so naturally with you. So it was so nice. But I want to ask you two more things.
Yeah.
One, somebody that has gone through the things you've gone through can easily become a victim. So
Mm.
I'm curious about that journey for you.
Hmm. Oh my God. This is true. And in my hardest days, I still have that consciousness within me because I'm human. But one of the things that I think has been a script that I loop in my head is, again, this is part of like, I think a bit of my spirit. I like to prove people wrong. I like to prove people wrong about me. I like to go under the radar and then, show
Yeah.
them
Oh my
over
God.
here. So there's a bit of the spirit, right? And I think that I've had to connect with it myself. And so using that template, if I could say anything, is that for one, we know when we're choosing to be a victim. And
Mhm.
sometimes that is where we're at because it's really freaking hard to not be a victim sometimes
I
when you've
love
gone
that.
through hard things. So allowing whatever is to be, it's about getting stuck there, right? That's the thing. It's not, oh, you can never feel like you're a victim. No, that's
Right.
that's human. And sometimes when we sit in our shit and we let ourselves sulk, you might create beautiful art from that. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
So for me, I think there's a personality element to it, knowing yourself, knowing how you want to see yourself, how you want to be presented. But here's the most important thing about all of it: create something, do something with it, use your life force. I don't care how down in the dumps you are. Remind yourself that you have the capacity to create and to build and to make change of anything. For me, it's music. I write when I'm in a crunchy state, cannot get myself out of bed, I'm tired, I'm depressed, whatever it is from the highs and the lows of life, I pick up my phone and I start writing it down. And it doesn't have to be that for you, but there's a reason
Yeah.
why these things exist. And there's a reason why we have life support and a desire. Remind yourself you have the ability to create whatever the heck you want.
Oh, I love that. My thing is horseback riding. Like,
Mm.
It's just been like the 1 hour of the day where my brain just shuts off and I get to be connected to my body, because horses are so sensitive. The second you start freaking out, they feel everything. This is like my meditative state. That's what it is for me. And everyone has one of those things that they can nourish.
That's exactly
Sure.
right. And it really does make the difference. And it's regenerative. This is the biggest thing. Is like, because oftentimes I'll work with people and they're like, well, it's like, well, find the thing that makes you feel alive.
Alive.
And it's like, it should make you feel better than when you started. Every time you do it, you walk away feeling freaking better. Like the horseback riding or writing a song or dance, whatever it is for whomever, cooking something, it doesn't matter. But if you walk away from it feeling better than when you walked in, it's part of your medicine.
Absolutely. And we have to pay attention to those moments. A lot of us just skip over it because life is so fast paced. We like don't take the time to notice, oh, I actually feel really good doing this.
Totally.
No, yeah.
Totally. And a lot of times it's stuff that we like to do when we were younger as well, like things we turned
Yes.
off.
Last question.
Yes.
What does being a trailblazer mean to you?
Okay, so one of my teachers talks to me about what it means to be a pioneer, right? I think it's kind of like similar.
Yeah.
And he always reminds me every time I have like a crunchy moment where I'm like, no one understands me, or I'm running up a hill and I don't have support, or whatever my melodrama is of what it means to be trailblazing. He reminds me, he goes, well, this is what it means
To be a pioneer.
to be a pioneer. You're out front. And so being out front means there's not a lot of people around you. Means you got a million arrows in your back, like you're going to be misunderstood. You're going to have moments where you're alone because you're walking a path that no one has walked before and you're blazing it for somebody else, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's so much about having a good sense of self and really, really knowing those tools, right? And when it's time to make a change, when it's time to do something new, or it's time to burst something, whatever it is, only you can know. That's the thing. Nobody else can make these decisions for you because they're not walking your path and they haven't walked it before. So that's the other piece of it. It's a different experience, and it's about knowing yourself and knowing that your choices are beyond just you. So
there's no roadmap, right?
No.
And so we don't know what's normal or what's not. Something else I learned about horseback riding is it looks really ugly before it looks pretty, right? And like if you stop at when it looks ugly, which a lot of us do because we're like, this is going all wrong, this is like messed up, this I don't know what I'm doing, that's where it ends. But like literally 2 steps ahead.
Yes, and having fun with the mess. You're like, this is messy, I know something good.
Yeah. Absolutely. This was fully a therapy session for me. Thank you.